Well, if you've made it this far, you should probably now be wondering something along the lines of, how do I make this thing? So if you're looking to make your own infographic, there are a lot of options at hand. The first and easiest option is to use an online infographic generator. There are a lot of really good ones, and if you just Google infographic generator, you can come up with a lot of options. Some of the more popular ones include Canva or Pictochart, both of which have free options. Um, I will say these are very, very useful when you're on the fly, when you're trying to do this out in the real world. For our purposes, for this assignment, I want you not to use one of these because I think you should have the experience of doing it the old-fashioned way before you allow someone else to make the bulk of the design decisions for you. This way you get a sense of what goes into the design process and you have more control over the design elements rather than having to choose from a template or using a drag and drop editor. So the first option I want to show you, which is probably the the more professional industry standard way of doing this from scratch, is using Adobe InDesign. And if you open Adobe InDesign, now again I should mention that I am using an older version of InDesign on my computer, CS5. So your version, if you have InDesign, might look different than this, but the principles should be more or less the same. When you open InDesign, you'll want to start a new document, and you'll get some options for page size, number of pages, and all of that. For now, we'll go with the default letter size, but you could easily make this a long, tall infographic. For example, I don't know, let's say we wanted this to be, let's just say 51 pixels by 200, just for the sake of it. Now when you hit OK, it's going to create your page for you. Here we go. And so you can easily create a long, tall infographic like many of the scrolling infographics you see are. A quick introduction to the layout here. It should look fairly familiar if you're at all familiar with Photoshop. You've got your tools down here on the left. You've got the information about each tool that you have selected up across the top. You've got your typical file edit layout menus up here, and then you've got some shortcuts and windows over here. So the first thing I want to talk about is simply trying to lay out your page. Now you can again zoom in and out using Command plus or Command minus, Control if you're using a PC, and you can scroll around with the mouse. So right here we have it set with a margin. You don't necessarily need a margin. If you're doing something in a fold of a page, you can put a bleed, but all of the, or a gutter, you can have the page go full bleed so that the picture goes right up to the edge. All of this is in your page layouts, margins and columns, all of this, these options right here. This will suffice for now. Now, if I wanted to try and get all of my stuff aligned here, I could just go and say maybe put some text. So I'll take the type tool and I'll drag a text box, and I could start by typing something like infographic. And then of course I can highlight that and I can change any of the text options up here. These two buttons here, character formatting and paragraph formatting. Character formatting is going to be your typical font choice. Here, let's go to a font that is actually legible. There we go. Text size, so maybe we'll make this quite a bit larger. But you can get really fine here as well. You can shift the vertical scale. You can actually sort of create your own fonts this way by stretching or changing. You can change how high superscript is you can actually change the kerning. This is really useful when you have a font that doesn't have an italics option. And so as you'll see here, my only two options here are inline and solid, which are more or less very similar. Inline, solid, I can't even tell the difference. Oh, here you have the inline, that's what they're referring to. No italics, and so you can actually change the slant, the skew, even here it says false italic, to create the italic effect. Same with the stroke weight. You can add a stroke to bold it artificially. So maybe if I pump this up, now you've got a very thick bold. Obviously that does not work so well with this font, but it gives you the options to play around. You're essentially adding an outline to the image of the text. You can change the text width. You can change the way that they overlap, the kerning. The paragraph formatting here is where you're going to get your alignment options and how the text fits on the page. So this is how far a paragraph is indented, how much space there is in between paragraphs. So you can really customize your text this way. Now say I have this text box. I can go over to my selection tool. By the way, there's two selection tools here. This is the selection tool and this is the direct selection tool. This will give you kind of like a blunt object selection, and this will let you select individual pieces. So if you have something that has more fine controls, you can toggle between what you're selecting with these two selection tools. And so I can change the size of my box here. But what if I want several of these boxes to line up? I can actually create some handy guides in InDesign by just going over to the ruler and dragging, and I can just put a line down, maybe right here at 1 inch, and then maybe I want to put another line down right over here at, say, another inch from the other side. And now if I wanted to move this around, it can snap right to those guides. And that way I can get another object lined up right here next to it. Say if I wanted another text box, I can snap it right to that line, right to that line. You could exceed it if you wanted. But it gives you a snapping guideline, and that way you can actually line up all of your text. Same if you want a vertical guide. So I could have it snap to that corner. So it's an easy way to get all of your elements to line up. Speaking of getting elements to line up, you might want to stick some other elements in here. For example, shapes. Now you can build your own shapes the old-fashioned way here, ellipses and rectangles. So here I'll throw a rectangle in, and obviously you can delete any elements you want by selecting it and hitting the delete button. So I'll throw a rectangle in here. I'll snap it to this line right over to here, and then this you can give it color if you want. There's several ways to color it, but one of the easiest ways is just to drag the color in, select it with the eyedropper tool. So you could actually create your entire image just using these shapes and colors, and you could build your whole layout that way. And similar to Photoshop, you can create layers, so that way if you don't want to accidentally select your text when you're trying to work with your colors, you could stick them in another layer. So I'm going to create a new layer, and then I'll go into the selection tool here, and right now all of my objects are in layer 1 and I've got nothing in layer 2, so I can just go right here and drag it right in to layer 2. And now if I hide layer 1, you'll see, oops, I just hit my rectangle. If I hide layer 1, you'll see only the rectangle that I dragged into layer 2, and vice versa. Now, if you don't want to try and build your elements from scratch here, you can also import elements. For example, if you have an image you want to import, you can use one of these rectangle frame tools. So say I have an image that I want to bring right in here, and I want it to be the size of this box right in here. I can go into my rectangle frame tool and snapping right to these guides. Now I've got a frame, and you can tell it's a frame by this X. And I can just drag and drop an image right into that frame. Let's see if I have an image handy here. Let's see. Alright. Warning, I don't know what image this is going to be. I'll drag this right in. There. And you see the image is here. Oops, sorry, I accidentally double-clicked on it. The image is here, and it automatically fills to that box and crops everything else out. So now if I go to my selection tool, you can see that it fits right into this box. Now if I've got it selected, I can toggle the fill options up here. So fill frame proportionately, that resizes so that the image stays proportional and it tries to fill the entire frame that I dragged. Or fit content proportionally. So that's going to make sure that all of the content of the image is shown and it fits proportionately. Now, right now I just happened by chance to have dragged a box that is almost proportional with the image, but you'll see if the box were a different size, this would allow for gaps to be shown depending on how you want to fill it. Where the content might be slightly smaller than the bounding box or slightly larger than the bounding box. You could also fit it to the frame regardless of proportion, aligning at different sides or in the corner or in the center. You could align to the left edges, align to the right edges, and so on and so forth. So you can play around with that. You can resize your bounding box. Here, this will give you a better idea. So now I've resized my bounding box. If I go to the direct selection tool, now I can move the image within the bounding box. Whereas if I do that selection tool, it's, pardon me, it's apparently going to let me move the whole thing. There we go. That will let me move the whole thing. So now, fit frame proportionately, fit content proportionally, stretch it to fill, fit it aligned at the side. So if I, let's see, bring it back over here, align it to the center, fit the bounding box around it, and so forth. So you can toggle it all around that way. Now, one of the cool features about this is you can actually create some interactivity by adding buttons or adding hyperlinks or adding media. And so, for example, if I wanted this square to become a button or a hyperlink, I could click on it and then I can just add a new button and give it one of these actions. So maybe go to a URL, and then I can specify the URL I want it to go to, www.google.com, just for kicks. And now when I publish this, you can see the little button icon down here. When I publish this at the end, it would end up being a clickable part of the image that would take you to a different destination depending on what you specified. Same goes for hyperlinks. You can create anything into a hyperlink. It can be an image, it can be an object. So you can get some good linkage here. You could create multiple pages, and so one page could link to another page, and you could create interactive elements that way as well. And you can preview those interactive elements. My computer always makes the preview take a long time to load. But it might just, there it goes. So right now you can see, oh, hey, there's a button here. and if I click it, it takes me to google.com. Hooray! Alright, now then, close our preview window. So this gives you a good sense of what you can do with InDesign. And then of course you can save as an InDesign file, which means when you open that file it will open it within InDesign and you'll be able to edit it. Or you can export it. And what you probably want to export this as is either a PDF or an image file. Image files are obviously going to be the most useful for infographics, but if you're including interactive elements, you may want a PDF file because PDFs can retain those interactivities like hyperlinks. You can get a sense my computer is just as old as my InDesign. So you can change right now by default, it's set it as a JPEG, but you can also, interactive PDF retains those interactive elements. Print PDF means it's going to flatten all those elements into just something that's not functional because it's intending to print. And you have all of these other options as well. But JPEG and PDF are the ones that you're probably going to want to worry about the most. Now, if this seems a little too complex or highbrow for you, there are much simpler options. You can make infographics on just about any program on your computer if you really get down to it. Just for kicks, I'll show you, here we go. I'll show you using Keynote, which is the Mac equivalent to PowerPoint, how you can very easily make an infographic. Now, if you create a slide, you can obviously string slides together to make a slideshow. But if you create a single slide, you can add elements, say text, infographic. You can move this around. You can change the font size. Styles. You can add shadows. This is a really easy way to get various effects that might be harder to do or more steps to do on InDesign. So you can see the shadow effect here. You can play around with all of that. But what's nice here is you also have built-in tables and charts, which means if you want to throw a pie chart in here, you can just go right in and drag a pie chart and drop it in. And then you can edit the chart data and put your actual contents in. So here you can see the different regions that are editable, and you can just substitute those numbers. And it resizes automatically. And of course, you have all of the same options as you would any other element as far as being able to design it, change colors, change any of these customizable options here. And you can arrange things, bring them towards the front or towards the back, as you can in most other image editing or layering programs. Now, what's really cool about Keynote and PowerPoint is you can animate transitions and use them as interactive components. For example, build in, add an effect. I can make it appear. And I can make it appear on a click or after a transition. So maybe I want this to appear, or I don't know, perhaps I want it to, I don't know, we'll say I want it to move in from the side, and I want it to appear automatically after the transition after 5 seconds. And now if I were to hit play, and did I put in 5 seconds? It didn't stick. Anyway, you can change that. I'm just choosing things arbitrarily. But this would allow you to create some interactivity where if the viewer clicks, then it can cause things to happen. And you can create clickable regions too. This could become a link, right? So um, if you have a text object or if you have another object, you can add a shape. And if you want this to turn into a button, you can just cover it with this shape and then format that shape to be completely transparent. But that shape might be able to link. Let's see. Add link. Here it is. If you right click, add link, and you can bring it to a different part of the slides. If you have multiple slides, you can create interactivity through multiple slides or through to a web page or email. So we'll do web page. We'll just say apple.com because that's the default here in my Apple loyal program. And now if I hit play, it moves in, and now when I try and click on it, it brings me to apple.com. So you can create all kinds of interactivity that way as well. Come back here. Now this is all well and good if you're thinking of it in terms of a presentation, but you can export these as images. So this could be exported as a JPEG file, as you see here. Or one of my favorite tricks is you can export this as an HTML folder. And what that's going to do is it's going to take all of your files, all of your slides, and it's going to package anything that it needs to know in order to reconstruct that slideshow as an HTML, package of HTML files. This is actually how I present a lot of my slideshows for students in classes that I teach in person, but want to make the slides available to them after class. I will export all of my slideshows as HTML, and then I upload those folders onto my personal website where I have a section that they can access. They can run through the slideshow themselves. And that allows them to be able to have some, allows my slideshow to have some life on the internet without having to need the viewer to download Keynote or PowerPoint. All you need is a browser. So if you want an interactive infographic, one possibility is you can use these animation tools and then you can export the whole thing as an HTML folder, upload that to a website, and now you've got an interactive infographic that people can click and cause things to happen. So I hope that's helpful. You can use these programs. You can use any other programs. You could even make an infographic on Paint, on Word, on Photoshop, on Illustrator, you name it. So feel free to get creative and try and create something really interesting. Good luck.